I'm going to talk today about a subject which is in many cases difficult. When I'm invited to speak somewhere, it's generally not a happy subject because it's a difficult one that I deal with every day. I am associated with the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles, and I work on the Digital Terrorism and Hate Project. The museum is based in Los Angeles, and works on the principle of using the lessons of the Holocaust to apply to the situations of today. We use the name of the famous Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal, who was also a concentration camp survivor, and then dedicated his life to bringing to justice the people that perpetrated the crimes of the Holocaust. So, as John said, I produced something called the Digital Terrorism and Hate Project, but when I started with the center over 32 years ago, we didn't have digital. So my first job was to subscribe to publications, as you see on the screen, hard copy publications, and it was not long after I started in 1985 that we started to see extremists using digital methods. There were proprietary systems like Genie and CompuServe and AOL later on, but that was still years before we got to what we now know as the World Wide Web. But extremists were already using those systems on BBSs, and we tracked them from those sites right to the web. As I said, we produced 20 volumes of digital. First, it was Digital Hate, and only after 9/11 did it become Digital Terrorism and Hate. And even at the time of 9/11, we still didn't have most terrorists online, mainly because internet access was very slim in the places of the world that many of the online terrorists operate. So these are the covers of our 20 reports, and I'm going to show you how to access the newest one later on in the program. So we have tracked these subjects, and one of the things that we have done for the last 5 years or so is we regularly work with the social networking companies. I've had many meetings with Facebook, Twitter, Google, some of the others, and we started producing a report card. And I can tell you that there is good news, because if you look, for example, at Twitter there, this year we gave them a B-. Just a few years ago, Twitter would have gotten an F. And the reason being is because they essentially were the weapon of choice for online terrorists. And in fact, there was a report a couple of years ago that something like 40,000 ISIS tweets a day were going across Twitter. So over the last couple of years, they've gotten very serious about it. You see some of the other large ones. Facebook has always taken this subject seriously. Terrorism is definitely a no-no on Facebook, as is most extremism. Some people you look at there and many people won't even recognize VK.com. VK is an interesting site. It is a Russian site, kind of mimics Facebook, but it doesn't have quite the bells and whistles that Facebook has. And many people are not even familiar with it, and yet it is the number 20 trafficked site in the world, with something in the neighborhood of 600 to 800 million users. So that's one that we like to take a look at closely. You'll also see two other categories on this report card. You see alt tech, which is something I'm going to be talking about extensively in a couple of minutes, and also messaging apps. And you see that the grades for messaging apps are very low or even non-existent. So let's talk a little bit about alt-right and alt-tech. Excuse me. So to understand what's gone on, especially in the last year, I have to give a little bit of history of who and what the alt-right really are. For many years, from the 1960s and well into 2002, 2004, the white supremacist slash extremist movement was dominated by a handful of figures. You see some of the most prominent ones here: William Pierce, Richard Butler of Aryan Nations, Tom Metzger of White Aryan Resistance, and Matt Hale, Church of the Creator, a little bit younger but a very prominent player in his day. Most of these I've had the opportunity to meet at some point or another. But William Pierce and Richard Butler passed away. Tom Metzger is now approaching 80 and not as active as he used to be. And Matt Hale, that you see there, is currently doing 40 years in federal prison for soliciting the murder of a federal judge. So what happened is, when these figures essentially went away about 12, 13 years ago, there was a vacuum left in the movement that was really not filled for a long time. And what happened was, in 2014, 2015, you had a new generation come along. Some of you may be familiar with Richard Spencer. Richard Spencer is the leader of the National Policy Institute. He's actually the guy who coined the term the alt-right. And he gave the infamous speech shortly after the 2016 election, where he got up in front of a group and he hailed Trump and gave a Hitler salute, and all his followers did the same. But Spencer, as you see, is a new kind of leader. He's young. He's got a couple of college degrees. He does not prance around in brown shirts or things with swastikas or other insignia on them. And he really was the one that got a lot of this started. He was prominent. He was a prominent player in Charlottesville a year ago. And that's really where this story starts. The alt-right, as we know it now, is a collection of different groups. And it was actually put into this alt-right FAQ by Andrew Anglin of this publication, The Daily Stormer. One of the things the alt-right was doing for a long time was using this image of Pepe the Frog that you see there, and I'll be talking about that in a little while as well. Excuse me. So who comprises the alt-right? Well, you have people that are into conspiracies and things like that, such as Alex Jones and InfoWars, that have just been in the news recently because most of the major social media sites have taken Alex Jones off their platforms. You have libertarians and paleo-conservatives, and these classifications are right out of the guide to the alt-right. You have the traditional white nationalists, as I showed you earlier on the screen. You have something called identitarian movements, which essentially the alt-right is. It's young nationalists that don't identify with parties and don't necessarily, in many cases, identify with groups either. You have the troll culture, the people that frequent Reddit and 4chan and 8chan, where there are very few rules on their platforms. You have something called the manosphere, which sounds a little strange, but it's actually guys that would like to return to the good old days in the 50s, where the man went out and worked and the woman was at home in the kitchen and producing children. I didn't always take this seriously, but then I started looking into the sites that they were saying the manosphere was part of, and certainly there is a tinge of that white supremacy there. And then some of the gamer culture, and one of the places that the alt-right has had a lot of success in recruiting in recent years has been with gamers. So if you go back to 2015, 2016, they even gave a name to it. They called it the Great Meme War of 2016. And what happened was that all these trolls from Reddit and some of the other sites were essentially trolling, arguing with people that made the slightest comment against then candidate Trump, and people that wrote editorials, they were trolled. In many cases, they were Jews. They were sent anti-Semitic comments and things on their sites, and the alt-right looks fondly on the Great Meme War of 2015, 2016. They even have made up some patches, and it's very telling here if you look at this patch that they made up, it says 1488. That 1488 is not by random number. 14 stands for the 14 words: we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. 88 is the 8th letter of the alphabet, H, or Heil Hitler. This is a very common greeting among white supremacists. It's also used as tattoos, and even many of them will use it in their email handles and things like that. So not random whatsoever. So we have, in 2016, we had this guy, Ricky Vaughn. If you're familiar with the name Ricky Vaughn, it was the Charlie Sheen character in the movie Major League. And Ricky Vaughn was one of the most active people on Twitter during the campaign. In fact, you see that MIT actually named him the 107th most influential Twitter account during the 2016 election. But he was very extreme, to the point that in August or October of 2016, he was banned from Twitter. And that really started this movement towards alt-tech, because he then went to a site called Gab. Gab is an interesting site that is kind of a cross between Twitter and Facebook. And if you look at the slide there, you see it says Ricky Vaughn, Gab, shows the thumbnail and the description. Anytime you see these slides on the presentation, that is actually out of our report, Digital Terror and Hate. It's in the form of an app, and I will show you how to get that app or the report at the end of this. But this is one of some 700 entries that we put on this report. So all the entries look like this. They'll also have PDFs or videos or something attached that you can view more of whatever it is that we're showing. So he went to a site called Gab. Gab is an interesting site because it was actually created in August 2016. It was created by a guy by the name of Andrew Torba, who is at the very least a follower or a sympathizer of the alt-right. And you see his quote there: "What makes the left entirely, what makes the entirely left-leaning big social monopoly qualified to tell us what is news and what is trending, and to define what harassment means?" So he started this site called Gab. The logo of Gab is up there at the top in the form of the frog. He was actually part of a group of developers called Y Combinator, and was actually kicked out of that group for threatening, harassing the other members of that young developers group. And interestingly enough, he claims his frog logo came from the Bible. But it is clearly, the site is relatively heavily trafficked for a site like this, and a good portion of the members are alt-right. So some of the themes in this alt-right in this new movement are things like this, what we see online: it's okay to be white. They're not trying not to promote themselves as white supremacists, but send this message that it's okay to be white, and the like. Another one of their themes is stopping white genocide. They believe that they are being genocided out of existence. If you remember the Torch March at Charlottesville last year, they actually said, "You will not replace us. Jews will not replace us." That was a reference to this white genocide that they believe is being practiced upon them. And there are some of the ads for the Charlottesville rally last year. As you know, just last weekend, there was an attempt at revival, which didn't really go so well for the alt-right. And many of the reasons will be encompassed in this presentation here as we talk about the alt-tech part of it. So what happened after Charlottesville? You had a woman named Heather Heyer, who was just there as a counter-protester, who was run over and killed. A number of the other major participants in the rally in Charlottesville last year were arrested and have other legal troubles. They at first tried to to raise money on sites like Patreon, the traditional fundraising sites, but Patreon said, you're not going to raise money on our sites. So what did they do? They created one called Hatreon. And this is the idea. The alt-right has, with alt-tech, they have now either found sites that are sympathetic to them or in many cases even started their own. So you have this one, Hatreon, another one that is very popular to the rest of us is called GoFundMe. So they created GoyFundMe. Goy is a term that means non-Jew. So when they couldn't access GoFundMe, they started GoyFundMe. But in the case of both of these, what's happened is the credit card company said, we're not going to give you access to fundraising. So those sites have pretty well been neutered. Some of the other sites that they have gone to that are sympathetic to them, there's one called WrongThink, there's one called Vote. These are similar to Reddit. They have less rules for discussions and so forth. So that they found sites like this. Minds is another one. If any of you saw the Vice News piece that they did on the alt-right and on Charlottesville, this guy Chris Cantwell was the crying Nazi that you saw on there. And interestingly enough, sometimes what they've done is they found sites. This is a dating site, Plenty of Fish. At one time had an alt-right section right on it where they could find like-minded people. So rather than continue to use that, they actually started their own dating site called Wasp Love. And this is some images from that. Love your race, procreate, preserve your heritage. They've also found alternative video sites, although YouTube for a long time did not deal much with the alt-right. They started to, and they started to remove offensive material, although there's still much on it. They've discovered BitChute, and they're using that. You see this one, Rebel Yell. Dr. Michael Hill was interviewed. He was actually one of the major participants in last year's Charlottesville rally as well. Atomwaffen Division, you may have heard of this. This is an extremely militant group. Up until very recently had a YouTube page, although YouTube has now taken that off. But Atomwaffen is essentially a Nazi group, a very sinister group that works at recruiting online, and a very deadly group. This group has been responsible for at least 5 murders over the past 16 or 18 months. So this is some of the outgrowth of the alt-right. As I mentioned earlier, one of the places that the alt-right are using are gaming sites and the process of gaming. This is an interesting Twitter feed. White Socialist is a guy who runs the gaming site Radical Exploits. And I want to blow this up for you because I want you to see what his Twitter feed said. You see, Dictatorial National Socialist, Spencerist, which is Richard Spencer, who I showed you earlier, united with my brothers in the alt-right, anti-capitalist and anti-communist, love Russia, white U.S., race is my nation. So my race is my nation. And that's a picture of Richard Spencer down below. So this guy is running this gaming site. Also, one of the things that you see are new symbols with extremists. If you look just above the name White Socialist, also in the center of the eagle there, you see a symbol you probably aren't familiar with, but it's called the sun wheel. And this is one that was actually in some cases used by Nazis during the Third Reich era, but also used by extremists in Europe in places where they can't display the swastika. They would display this, and all their followers know who and what they are. So this guy runs this gaming site. Another app that's used and is popular with gamers is one called Discord. And Discord has various groups and things on it, and we find things like this, a reference to the 20th of April division. The 20th of April is Hitler's birthday. The skull and crossbones there was the symbol. It's called the Totenkopf, or the death's head, was found on the SS uniform of the SS who ran the concentration camp. And then this is a couple of the groups that are on this app Discord. I apologize for that. Then also, again, the different one playing on the Atomwaffen division and also using Pepe the Frog, as I mentioned earlier. At this point, I just want to say that there's another site called Steam. Steam is a mainstream site. This is just one that says time to hate. This is actually the Azov Battalion. It's a neo-Nazi paramilitary group that's actually fighting in the Ukraine, but has a site on this site, Steam. Steam is actually a very mainstream site that has over 35 million active users and features networking, multiplayer gaming, video streaming, digital marketplace, and it has these various groups on it. Now, Steam has removed a few of these groups, but basically the low-hanging fruit. They really don't know about all these other type of groups that are what they are and who they are and what they're using their site for. I've mentioned Pepe the Frog a couple of times. It's very interesting. They have created a new figure called Groyper, mainly because the original artist that drew Pepe the Frog, Matt Furia, had no intention of it being used for the alt-right, and in fact, he was very upset when they started using it. So initially, he said he was going to retire Pepe, but now he has actually started to sue these guys for their misuse of it. So they've created this thing called Groyper, and there's another example. If you look closely at Groyper, it doesn't look much different than Pepe the Frog, but it seems to work for them. One of the other things that these guys have done is created this kind of virtual world called Kekistan. And some even say that it's sometimes called Kek. Some even say that Kek stands for kill every kike, or a very disgusting word to be used for Jews. But they've created this Kekistan. They're actually, you can find these actual flags marketed. They show up at some alt-right protests and things like that. And here they say, join the Knights Keklar. They're getting ready for another future meme war. And then the classic Iwo Jima photo with the Kekistan flag. So the good news is that, as we saw in the rally that took place just this past Sunday, that since Charlottesville, the alt-right has been absolutely at each other's throats. Almost all the major alt-right figures told their followers, do not attend the rally in Washington last week. They have broken with Jason Kessler, the guy who took out the original permit for Charlottesville and also organized this rally in DC last week. He has now said he doesn't want to be associated with the alt-right and Nazis and others, although those are the people the handful of people that did show up at his particular rally last week. So the alt-right is very much in disarray, and it's almost all of it stems from Charlottesville. That really was a high watermark for extremists, and as I've said, many of them have legal troubles. They've ended up in jail. They've ended up being sued, and so forth. And it's not only had an effect on them, but as I've showed around the web, because after Charlottesville, the Daily Stormer was immediately taken offline after the very night they produced a disgusting editorial about Heather Heyer, the woman that was killed, claiming that she wasn't even a good breeder for the white race and disturbed and deserved to die, and so forth. So many of the traditional mainstream sites, social networking, and others have started removing a lot of alt-right material, and those that have come back on have found themselves, some have found themselves on the dark web, and certainly not getting the attention and readership that they used to. So I want to talk a little bit about terrorism, because that's also a project that we do. We find the best of the worst every year. These are just some of the images we find on a regular basis. Here's another one. This is one threatening the capitals of Europe. This is actually an ISIS image. Another ISIS image, the one-way ticket to Jannah or paradise. This is a very ominous one, again, featuring the Roman Colosseum and the Eiffel Tower in Paris. And then this one urging people to find martyrdom and go directly to heaven because they've died in the service of Allah. This is a very unique image because it shows a guy about to stab a guy wearing an American flag as a shirt, and you look closely at the knife there, and you'll see that that's actually the ISIS logo that's on the knife. In places where they don't have weapons, they've said, you know, use knives. And some of the this is a number of threats that were made towards the recently finished World Cup, and luckily, other than the questionable incident with the taxi on a Moscow street, there were no serious incidents at the World Cup, but they literally threatened the cup, the players, and used some of the players by name, such as Neymar and Messi and Ronaldo, the major soccer figures in the world these days. It's just a generic threat as well to that. That's again to the right of the World Cup trophy. There is another ISIS logo. This series of postings that you see were found on Instagram last year, and although Instagram, owned by Facebook, does a pretty good job of removing material like this, they don't always get to it immediately. So this was a series of postings, and basically what it's saying is that soldiers, you are in danger. It sends out messages to their followers and pretty much all over the world, talking to just individual Muslims and telling them about the targets, and probably this one here. If you can't come and join us in Al-Sham, or what is the greater Syria, if you can't come to the battlefield, you can do just as much damage in your own backyard, even if it's just your neighbor you kill or somebody in your neighborhood, etc. With ISIS contracting over the past couple of years and only holding a small portion of territory in Syria, they are still putting out messages like that, urging their followers to do things by remote. And the other thing that they do is they also say, if you're not a warrior, if you can't come to the battlefield, then you can act on the virtual battlefield and be a media advocate. And urgings like this are things that we see on a regular basis all the time. Now, one thing I want to talk to you about is messaging and encryption. And unfortunately, the terrorists are using many of the same apps that your children and grandchildren are using. Most of you be familiar with WhatsApp and Snapchat. Snapchat is currently the app of choice for most teenagers. And a couple you may not have heard: SureSpot, Haywire, Telegram, Signal Messenger. But you see just some examples of terrorist attacks where they have actually used some of these apps. WhatsApp, which was the biggest one with kids for a long time. The London attacker in 2017 used it. In Stockholm, same thing. In Garland, Texas, there was an attack on a gathering where the attackers used SureSpot to communicate directly with ISIS. And another one called Kick. So these have been used on a regular basis. These are encrypted. And if you remember all the hoopla about after the San Bernardino attack about encryption, that wasn't even about these apps. All that was about was actually getting into the iPhone that the attacker had. So these apps make it more and more difficult and make it harder for anyone, especially those in government, trying to monitor terrorism. All right. So Telegram is an interesting app. It was actually started by the guy who started VK.com after he was pushed out by Putin and his oligarchs. And Telegram looks like this. On the left, you see the various feeds that you can get. On the right, you see the what's uploaded to one feed. And in this case, Nasher was a series. This one's in English, but it was a series that were actually uploaded by ISIS in different languages. And you see on the right there that they have information. They have hyperlinks that you can click on right through the app, take you to wherever they want to. Telegram is still used extensively by ISIS operatives and terrorists today, as well as some of the far-right extremists as well. Interestingly enough, this was another Telegram feed that you look at the right there and you see Tutanota DE. Well, through Tutanota, I followed that link, and what do I find? That's actually an app where you can get mail directly through the app, fully encrypted. You just download the app, create an email account, and it's fully encrypted, and nobody can track it. Then you have this one called Kick I mentioned earlier. This was a few years ago, but this was a soldier in Syria, and you see he's a fighter in the way of the Lord, merciful to the believers, harsh towards the kuffar or the infidels. And then he gives various things. He gives Ask FM, and he also gives a Kick address. Well, Kick is another one of these messaging apps, so I followed that, and I was able to have a direct conversation with him in the space of a very short time. An app called SureSpot, which is even more encrypted, and I think a bigger concern because they keep no records whatsoever. If the government, even if they get a warrant, there's nothing on their servers and the like. So I saw this Twitter account. Fortunately, it's no longer there, but this guy was using the name of al-Awlaki, the American imam who went to be the spiritual leader of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen. So he was using that name, and he gives both a Kick address and he gives a SureSpot address. So I downloaded SureSpot. Within 5 minutes, I was talking to a ISIS fighter in Syria. And this is just part of the 15-minute conversation that I had with him, asking him why he's using this app, how's his internet service. Now, actually, this is a few years ago and the situation has changed, but it shows how easy that if I could get in touch with this guy, how about a young person who's inspired by ISIS or some other extremist group, and within minutes is able to be talking directly to one of them. In the old days, when I started this job, I got a mailbox and I subscribed to all these publications, and sometimes it was weeks or months till I had communication, if at all. And here, now you can do it in the space of minutes. So, as I said, we produced this app called, and report called Digital Terrorism and Hate. This is what the app looks like. When you download it and you go into it, you see 3 major categories there: strategies, terrorism geographic. So we break sites down by geographic. We have a terrorism section. And strategies is basically what we're finding, how extremists, both terror and hate, are using the web, different apps that they're using, different tactics, their publications. We have a breaking feature, we have a report a site feature, and you can also search the app. I will tell you we've had some issues with Google Play, so we do have a version on there. You can get it, but unlike the Apple version or the iPad, which works best, you cannot get the attachments such as the videos and so forth. At one time, Google thought we were somehow promoting terrorism, but I was able to get that straightened out. But the version does not have the attachments with it. So when you go into our app, say you go to the geographic section, you'll get subcategories like this, where we cover most of the world. And if you go into US and Canada, you'll see that we have subcategories inside there as well. And each one of those will have a series of entries, anywhere from 10 to 20 entries that look like this. You click on any one of these and you'll get the individual entries. You look at the top there, the Parkland crisis actors. This is just one example of a site that after the Parkland shooting, you had a number of people that were saying that it's another false flag attack, it didn't happen, and so forth. And one of them even went as far as to say, see, look at this girl. She was at all these different attacks, the Boston Marathon, the Sandy Hook shooting, the Aurora, Colorado theater shooting, and of course, Parkland. Just crazy kind of conspiracy stuff, but unfortunately, the web is a breeding place for this type of thing. So there are many more things I can cover. I will tell you that the good side is I have created a class which we can use for students to kind of gently introduce them to extremism on the web, not organized groups, but just offensive sites, whether it's racist jokes or something derogatory about Anne Frank, whose diary most of them have read, and so forth. We created a class that can be done in a single class period, and it's interactive and gets the kids talking to their friends about what they're seeing and then reporting to the class. I won't go through the whole thing because I'd like to leave some time for questions. This is how you would access our app and report. It is on a website, looks a little bit different. If you get the app on your phone, it looks more like these screens that I've been showing. And there's also an email within the app that ireport@wiesenthal.com that you see at the bottom also goes directly to me. And at this point, if you have any questions, I will be happy to take them. I guess we still have 8 or 10 minutes left.
Yeah, we do. And I've got one for you to respond to a comment, and I can understand what they're kind of saying. They were concerned that your presentation, the beginning part, comes across as that you're promoting these sites that you were showing us. And because most of these sites are sites we've never heard of before. Right. And I would agree that it's a promoting, not being a positive of it, but bringing it to our awareness of what's out there, because we don't know.
And you know what, that's an interesting question, because back when we first started this, and we have an exhibit that consists of this in the museum, one of the things that we were concerned with was the same thing. Well, we certainly didn't want to be promoting this material. But unfortunately, that ship has sailed. We're now 23, 24 years into the World Wide Web. Young people who might not know about these sites. I'll give you an example. When I was in school in the 60s, and if we wanted to find the KKK or somebody like that, we really had to work at it. Now a kid can get on his phone while he's in class. He can locate these sites. unfortunately, as I've shown you, he can communicate directly with the people that post these sites. So we're in the business of education, and the more education, the more awareness that's out there. Yes, will somebody maybe look at our app and say, gee, I'm going to find one of these sites and join up with these clowns? That's always possible. But the vast majority are not familiar with this material and need to be, especially parents, because their kids can get on this stuff purely by accident, just by searching for alternative music and get on racist music sites. So yes, that was a concern a long time ago. We are so far beyond that.
Good. In the terms of what you've been showing us as who you're monitoring, someone wanted to know whether or not the Simon Wiesenthal Center monitors non-white American hate groups.
Absolutely, and in fact, inside the app, you will find Hispanic groups that believe that there's a larger Hispanic empire within the borders of the southern United States, and they want it back. You will find various groups such as the New Black Panther Party and others as well. You will find anti-Muslim groups. I will tell you that we try to encapsulate what's on the web into one app. And I'm always looking for new sites, but I have to tell you that we still find that the vast majority come from the far right. But absolutely, we look the world for sites like this. That's why we have a reporting feature right in the app. If somebody in this presentation sees sites that they think should be there that are not far right, that are something else, then we absolutely look for those and are happy to put them into the project.
All right, you ready for the big one?
Sure.
What can we do to fight this messaging on the internet?
I think that one thing that is now being done is, and I made a comment 25 years ago that I think is just starting to come to fruition, that it would be the internet users themselves that stifle this activity. To some extent, that is coming to pass many years later, because the social networking sites are starting to take responsibility. They're looking at what's offensive. They still try to allow discussion. Some of you may have heard the big discussion recently about Holocaust denial on Facebook. And they still allow some of that as discussion, but when it starts to get offensive, when people go over the line in their arguments and so forth, they remove that material. Google, YouTube, which has always figured we're the biggest, we don't have to do anything, they are now starting to look at what's going on their site, and that comes from internet users. Every social networking site has a way to report offensive material. We also, as I say, within our app, we have an iReport@wiesenthal.com address. When people see offensive material, send it to that address, send it directly to my email that you see on the screen, because we will take those to the social networking companies. We will do the work when we know what's out there. It's a big internet. We can't find everything, but the internet users have had an effect, because it's taken a long time, but we are getting to a point where the vast majority of people on the net do not want to see this material there, and I think are making great strides in doing so.
I think your presentation was helpful to know that there are services out there that have good points to it, but also because of the nature of internet can have some bad. Because I just learned about the Telegraph, and I know of some technology people that are good people that use it, but now I also hear that there's a lot of negative because it's just so big.
Right. And let me just say one other thing. I just want to say, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, we are the last ones to be the enemies of free speech. Historical discussion is fine when you accuse an entire people or the tens of thousands of Holocaust survivors out there of being liars because you claim the Holocaust didn't happen. That's another story. Free and open discussion should go on the internet, but also remember that social networking companies are private companies. They are not in the business of censorship. They are in the business of enforcing their own rules, and they can set their rules any way they want. And there are many sites out there that allow many things to go on.
Oh, good, because that just kind of fell into the next question. Kind of the opposite is that there are major social networks that might be preventing legitimate discussions that might disagree with government activities, what the government is doing. And so because they are private, they can limit, they don't want you to discuss against the government.
There may be sites that do that. Certainly, the government, no matter which party is in charge at the time, is always a target of online activity and always will be. But again, and truthfully, most of the big ones, such as Facebook and Twitter, they try to live up to the principles of the First Amendment. But some things are too much for them. They also have to deal with rules in other countries where they do not have the same First Amendment principles that we do. And some of these big social networks have been sued in other countries for allowing material that may go against the laws in their country. So these social networking companies, especially the major ones, are grappling with this subject every day, and in general do a relatively good job of trying to set appropriate rules.
Great. I think we're coming to the end of the time, but we'll leave the chat open if you have other questions that you can submit, and we'll send to Rick. You've got his email location here. Download the app. Become educated, I think, is the biggest thing to be. And I really think that it's a difficult topic, but I think it's one that our groups should be using at our club meetings, because we are the technology users and we need to be better educated more than just how to use Word and Firefox and things like that.